Hello and welcome to a Week 9 edition of the Establish the Run Waiver Wire Show. My name is Adam Levitan, as always joined by the season-long bro you know and love to discuss yet another wide receiver heavy week on the wire. Daigle, how's it going today?
Probably shocking to people that are tuning in that I do not look like Daigle, but the beard will be back in 3 weeks' time after Halloween. Just give it a little bit.
Yes, for the audio listeners, Daigle has completely shaved his beard, leaving him with no facial hair whatsoever outside of eyebrows. I think it looks good, but just me. Okay.
It looks like a penis with eyebrows. Yes, you are correct.
Okay. Let's go to the big stories of this week on the waiver wire. The big story, of course, first is the Jameis Winston stuff. So this was one of the best spots that you were going to get for the Browns. It doesn't feel like it, but everybody throws on the Ravens. That's everybody's game plan. And they didn't have Marlon Humphrey. They didn't have Nate Wiggins. I mean, they were an absolute mess. And so you could say, well, this huge Jameis game, it's not going to be that sticky. I don't know, though, man. Kevin Stefanski is a bit of a quarterback whisperer. You could say they want to get a look at DTR, but given the way this team played or had to deal with Deshaun Watson for so long, can this locker room really face going back to a project-type quarterback to see what he has after they've seen what Jameis Winston can do for this team? So I'm kind of operating under the assumption right now that Jameis is going to make a lot of starts for this team the rest of the way. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of starts the rest of the way. And if that is the case, I don't care what the matchup is. Tillman, Elijah Moore, even Judy are going to be in play, I think. But there's certainly tougher matchups coming up. Daigle, what do you think about Tillman and Brown stuff?
I am viewing it like you, and that the floors of everyone have been heightened with Jameis under center. We did get the true Jameis rollout, and that he was even charted with 3 dropped interceptions. Everyone is aware of that Kyle Hamilton one at the end of the game, when on the very next play, he found Cedric Tillman for his second touchdown deep. Also a strip sack in that game, too, in the first quarter for Jameis. But beyond that, just to be able to fire it 10 yards downfield, 20 yards downfield with accuracy, that's something the Browns just haven't had. And that's helped unlock all of these players. Tillman now in back-to-back games, 25% and 21.9% target shares, 37% of Cleveland air yards last week as well. Elijah Moore, who's being used as a more chain mover and effective slot wide receiver, 13 targets, actually leading in target share as well since Jameis entered in the fourth quarter a couple weeks ago. So yes, we just want all of these players, regardless of what the experience is going to be. I still personally would take in order Tillman, Elijah Moore, and Judy, so much so that I would drop Jerry Judy for Tillman and Elijah Moore if you have that option on waivers.
So Tillman is going to go for the most, right? And
Yep.
we have pretty big fab guidance here to spend on Cedric Tillman. Background for people on Cedric Tillman, could make case he was better than Jalen Hyatt at Tennessee. Certainly had some fans coming out. Ability to earn targets back-to-back weeks from 2 different quarterbacks for the most part, by the way, Tillman has done. So that's been impressive. Elijah Moore has long been, I mean, I've lost a lot of money on Elijah Moore, man, in my life. Like DFS, season long, dynasty even. Elijah Moore was the 34th overall pick in the 2001 draft to the Jets out of Ole Miss. He's still only 24 years old. And like, if people are going to spend 60 to 80% on Tillman and then let us have Elijah Moore for pennies, that kind of interests me as well, Daigle. So what do you think about spending on these Browns guys?
I made it clear to not only write it in Tillman's blurb, but bold it. But just in case you still miss it and can't read, you know your league better than we do. If you don't have to walk in and spend 60 to 80 of your remaining fab, then don't do it. It's not necessary. But if you can get away with 21, 25, that's wonderful. But I do think it's a situation where I know a lot of people have already asked me ahead of the waivers chat, 5 p.m. Eastern, shout out to all of us, if they would keep Jalen McMillan, for example, instead of Tillman. And I think Tillman is just a better player now with Jameis under center to insert weekly as a wide receiver 3 flex option. So Tillman, I think the moral of the story is I'm trying to win him.
Okay. What about McMillan or Elijah Moore? Because I actually think that one's kind of close. And part of complicating this is that Deontay Johnson is almost certainly going to be on the move before next Tuesday. He could end up landing with the Bucs to give them Mike Evans and when he returns from his hamstring injury, and Deontay Johnson. So what do you think about McMillan versus Elijah Moore? You do have same fab guidance for both of those guys.
And we're talking about guys I have jammed in with Demarcus Robinson. Maybe we can get that in a bit, as players that we are now targeting based on what we believe their roles will be rest of season. I would personally take McMillan over Moore, just because, again, I don't want to base the entire run out of Jameis for the rest of the season on his performance against Baltimore's third string cornerbacks. I think McMillan still has a very high ceiling, especially since we're unclear on Mike Evans outside of potentially reportedly returning in week 11 after the team's bye, and Sterling Shepard suffering a hamstring injury we're waiting on as well after this last week.
Yeah. Schedule stuff on the Browns, I think, is notable. So they play the Chargers this week and then the Saints, two fine spots. But then Steelers, Broncos, Steelers, Chiefs. So that's going to be like a full month of very difficult matchups for the Browns guys. Again, Steelers, Broncos, Steelers, Chiefs. So certainly not ideal there. I think that's worth noting. But in the fantasy playoffs, at Bengals versus Dolphins, that's week 16 and 17 for the Browns. So I think when we're making some of these decisions here, thinking about what kind of matchups they will have in the fantasy playoffs does make sense as we begin to get, or we have now, better ideas of what types of teams we want to be attacking with different positions. Demarcus Robinson, I think people will be surprised to find on this list, Daigle, because Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua both came back on Thursday, and I thought looked pretty good. Assuming those two guys are healthy, it's hard to see Demarcus Robinson earning a lot of targets. He was certainly efficient on them last week. How would you compare Demarcus Robinson to the Browns guys?
It's like the Friends reunion episode. The gang is all back together. And we know what happens when the gang is all back together. In their last 8 games with Puka, Cooper Kupp, and Kyron Williams all on the field, the Rams have averaged 6.2 yards per play. That would have ranked 3rd best offense last year and 5th best offense so far this year. And in those 8 games, Demarcus Robinson operated as the 3rd wide receiver, as he did against Minnesota on Thursday night. And in those 8 games, he's tied Cooper Kupp for a team high 9 end zone targets, similar to how McVay used Odell Beckham as a red zone and end zone threat during the Rams Super Bowl run. So we're just going right back to the copy paste takes from best ball season this offseason, and understanding that Robinson, when everyone is healthy and out there running this Sean McVay offense at full strength, Robinson has standalone value as a weekly flex option.
Yeah, I think I prefer Elijah Moore to Demarcus Robinson, but I could see how some people might feel differently there. If you go to the site, Sam Sherman does have an article up about the trade deadline. The big one, of course, is Deontay Johnson, as we already mentioned. Xavier Legette, I think, if he is on waivers, he was close to a big play against the Broncos in a difficult matchup. He probably wouldn't be available or as cheap to get if he had caught that one. And then Jalen Coker, also, who I believe we have on the deep list here, does Daigle. Those would be the two, if you're trying to get out in front of trade stuff that's really likely to happen. Legette and Coker. Any thoughts on those guys or any more trade deadline thoughts, Daigle? And again, I believe the trade deadline is 1 week from today. Tuesday after week 9 is the trade deadline.
Want to take chances on both of them since the target tree is still ambiguous. I have major question marks of if we can get 2 Panthers wide receivers there, if we think Bryce Young is going back under center, especially in the fantasy playoffs. I still lean towards Legette pretty heavily too. I think the splits aren't showing everything behind the scenes, even as I note in the waiver column before Legette was taken off the field in the 4th quarter because the Panthers just being run over expectedly by the Broncos. He still led the team in being targeted on 30% of his routes. He's still the 1st round player who's seen a double-digit target share in every game he's finished without Adam Thielen this year. So Legette's the one I still want. But Jalen Coker for 14-team leagues, absolutely interested in. 2.6 yards per route run this past week, and now over the last month is just lapping Jonathan Mingo, despite being the undrafted free agent of the two, just lapping Mingo in participation. So again, I want both players.
Yeah, the Coker looks like he can play, man. And I know the tape bros really like what he's been doing, and the production is followed. Like sometimes, all this stuff about tape bros and separation, it's meaningless to me unless they're actually able to earn targets. And Coker has done that. Last thing I'd say on Panthers stuff, week 15 against the Cowboys, week 16 against the Cardinals, week 17 against the Bucks. I mean,
okay.
I'm not saying Bryce Young can do it, but those are going to be spots where in theory at least, he could do it. Let's go to some more guys from the top here. So Christian Kirk is out for the season. Gabe Davis also sustained a shoulder injury in that game. Brian Thomas is day-to-day with a chest issue. Obviously, the biggest bump, I think, is going to go to Evan Ingram. We've seen this historically. Evan Ingram's obviously owned in your league. We'll be talking about Evan Ingram plenty more on Friday night. Parker Washington, I thought, flashed decently last year on his opportunities. Daigle, what do you think the fallout will be from all this Jaguar stuff? And by the way, I would add, for everybody who wants to bury Trevor Lawrence, I think he's played pretty well over the last month and certainly well enough to support fantasy wide receivers. So yeah, what do you think the fallout is from all this cluster going on with the Jags?
I do worry a bit that this may be too many losses all at once, since we're talking about the team's 3 starting wide receivers all potentially being out. And maybe that does lead to more 2 tight end sets with Ingram and Brenton Strange. But Parker Washington, someone I definitely want to try and be ahead on. We saw 2 games last year with Christian Kirk and Jamal Agnew, who was working in 2 wide receiver sets, out. And in those 2 games, Washington only saw 9 targets, but he was used similar to how we talked about Robinson, how we talk about Andre Yoshivas. He's not as big as those guys, but he saw 2 end zone targets, converting them into touchdowns. Last week, when he came off the bench, he also ended up leading the team in routes run from that point forward and saw another end zone target. So maybe that's just how Lawrence and Peterson enjoy using him. And if that's the case, he can certainly provide production. I just think there's so many vacated targets there now and so many wide receiver routes available that he has to be at least on the field for every snap.
Yeah, exactly. And like this secondary defense is so bad, it sets up well for wide receiver production if they can be reasonably efficient. You know, I mean, there's going to be chances for them to throw a ton and get into shootouts if they can move the ball. Jermaine Burton is on the list here as a 1 to 2%. You know, Yoshivas with T. Higgins out has actually been worse, which obviously it's hard to see coming. But I think part of that is Mike Gesicki uses that, takes over a bunch of that role when T. Higgins is out. And also Jermaine Burton is probably almost certainly a more talented player than Andre Yoshivas right now. T. Higgins' injury does not sound serious. Sounds like a day-to-day thing. I don't know that even if he were out again, I'd be comfortable starting Jermaine Burton. But in Dynasty or any leagues like that, I do think that Jermaine Burton, when T. Higgins leaves after this season, is going to be the guy that ideally the Bengals want to win this job. So just wanted to bring him up. Any more thoughts on Burton or Bengals stuff, Daigle?
We're seeing it shake out a little bit now that we've had 3 games without T. Higgins. And I have him a little higher over guys who are already fringe darts that I just wanted to speak on, John Mechie, Jalen Coker. But in those 3 games without Higgins now, Mike Gesicki has been used as a team slot wide receiver, 7 catches in his last 2 games, both of them without Higgins. And then Burton, although he struggled to get on the field those first 2 weeks, which makes sense considering we had the reports coming out that running the wrong routes in preseason games, falling asleep at team meetings as well. But apparently this last one, he earned the coach's trust. Route on a season high 43% of dropbacks, and his 2 catches this year have unsurprisingly both gone for 40 yards because that's who he was at Alabama. He led this entire class of wide receivers with a career 17-yard depth of target. This is what he does as a better Jalen Hyatt if he can get on the field. So since it is Zach Taylor and we have a history of him somewhat lying about his injury statuses, I just wanted to put Burton on there to be a little bit higher just in case we do get more of a week-to-week thing with T. Higgins.
Okay. You notice there's no running backs on the list here. Just want to be clear for people. That does not mean that we don't think you should be making moves at the running back position. I'm sure there have been a lot of drops of some of these guys who are really good, one injury away type targets. Braylon Allen is in on top of our tier 1 right now. Blake Corum seems like he's completely iced. Ronnie Rivers, at least for now. Zach Charbonnet, obviously behind Kenneth Walker, and the list goes on and on. I would be, if you have a really good team, I like to optimize my bench for superstar situations. In other words, if James Cook goes down, I have Ray Davis and I have an absolute smash on my hands, stuff like that. And so we can't know exactly how deep your bench is, exactly what you need. But I do think using the 1 injury away list when looking at running back ads is important. Daigle, anything to add here on 1 injury away at the running back spot?
I think the top 2 this week, especially if you don't need Tyler Algier, who I do think is an RB3, RB4 against the Cowboys this week, has gotten his most touches whenever the Falcons have been in blowout situations. And that can certainly happen against what is a very bad Cowboys team on both sides of the ball. But if you don't need that immediate usage, Braylon Allen, Blake Corum, you talked about it, the top two options. I fear that Braylon Allen's still not a flex like he was this past week against the Patriots. It's just odd, and I attribute it more to being on a short week against the Texans, that they, after allowing Hall to out-touch Braylon 41-6 in their last two games, suddenly came out of nowhere, giving Braylon 12 touches to Hall 16. I don't know if that's going to be the case or consistent, and I don't want to be stuck with holding the bag, having him as a flex, if that is going to get the rug pulled out on him again. But what I even note in the column is that if you look at the Jets' remaining schedule beyond this week, it's the Cardinals, who are 5th in points per game allowed to opposing running backs, the Colts, who are 11th, the Seahawks, who are 4th, the Dolphins, who are 6th, the Jaguars, who are 8th, the Rams, who are 14th, and the Bills, who are 10th, all through December. If Hall were injured on Thursday, the runway is a league-winning one for Braylon Allen.
Yeah, and the Braylon Allen situation is so clean. The Charbonnet situation is so clean. I think Damian Pierce is so clean. I am a little worried on Blake Corum that if something happens to Kyron, we'd see some Ronnie Rivers. I'm worried that with Vidal, if something happened to Dobbins, we'd see some Haskins and some Gus Edwards when he gets back, etc. So yeah, I think just kind of trying to think through what the outcome would be there on guys that you're stashing makes sense. By the way, I know we keep referring to schedule stuff. Hopefully you guys, if you have in season, go to the NFL tab and go to right here, defense versus position rankings, and we can say by percent what percent everybody is inflating. So the Panthers are inflating running back scoring by 10% over expectation based on our model, etc. This is all baked into projection, so I don't want anyone to double count here. I just want to make sure that people were using that page. Let's go back to the waiver column here, Daigle, for some deep league targets. So there are, I think, some other options through here. Specifically wanted to talk about if Steph Diggs is out for the year. So we had no word yet on this. Went down with a non-contact knee injury on Sunday. Usually those are scary, man, and miss time. Maybe he won't. Maybe he's okay. I actually have no idea. But in the event that Steph Diggs is seriously hurt, Xavier Hutchinson's been playing so much. We're going to get Nico Collins back in week 10. Reports on him are good. I'd love to see John Mechie, man. And I still don't know why they got rid of Noah Brown, but maybe that's just irrelevant at this point. But yeah, I don't know, Daigle. I'm a little lost on Texans pass game right now. What do you think about, let's operate as if Steph Diggs is like 75% to have a serious injury?
Well, we've talked about this on many shows this year. The way we should be playing season long is not worried about missing out on the wide receiver 3s and 4s when we can take shots at guys who can become wide receiver 1s, RB1s. And that's how I feel about John Mechie, is that we've already seen a month of Xavier Hutchinson, and that's been too much to total just 5 catches in that time in place of Nico Collins. Whereas Mechie comes off the bench in the fourth quarter when Stephon Diggs was injured, and he not only worked from 2 wide receiver sets, but he did have a team high 2 targets for 25 receiving yards, which again is already more than Hutchinson has showed us in a month of play. 4 catches in many games, by the way, without Nico. So definitely open to taking a chance on Mechie. Remember, we just hadn't seen him play much since he missed his entire rookie year, since he's the hero battling back from leukemia. But even then, when he was drafted, led Alabama in receptions. And so, sure, I'm curious what we can get. We know Nico is going to be out at least 1 or 2 more games. So I'm curious to see if Mechie can step up in 2 wide receiver sets over Hutchinson for the rest of the year, since they continue using Tank Dell primarily in the slot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I took some Mechie in best ball. I was taking Noah Brown, and then for some inexplicable reason, they just get rid of Noah Brown after they gave him guaranteed money, even though he gave them really good routes last year, I thought. And then they come back, and I was like, all right, well, I'll take some John Mechie here in my Stroud stuff, because for the reasons that Daigle said, I mean, Mechie was absurdly productive in college, but now he's playing behind Xavier Hutchinson. I mean, it's a mess, man. Texans pass game is a mess in general. I'm going to talk more to Silva about that today. Other guys on the deep league list here, Jonnu, Garendo. We did get a question in chat about Garendo, if you want to take that now, Daigle, but anything else from the deep league thing you wanted to highlight here?
Anytime I'm adjusting the list of backups, You just have to make sure you frame the situations ahead of them. And you don't have to squint to see Garendo starting in week 10, despite what's going on. Jordan Mason suffers another shoulder injury, and Christian McCaffrey is unclear, although we believe he'll be back. But again, we play in ranges of outcomes. Nothing is guaranteed. And we've seen Garendo now come off the bench, and his numbers should be better in both games, despite having over 90 rushing yards the first time and then 84 yards this past week. Both games he ended up kneeling in before he scored a touchdown because he's a team player. Garendo, dude, gets there just in a pop. That's who he was coming out of college as well. So it's a situation where Garendo has shown us like he's a top tier stash if it works out in his favor.
Right. And so we got a question from Abogovich, who is the 49ers running back to roster after CMC? I guess you could, I would probably still make the case for Jordan Mason. I don't think that his AC joint sprains are annoying, but they're not serious injuries. It causes him to like keep getting banged up and leaving games. It's not ideal, but if he can get healthier over the bye, I think it'll still be Mason. If you can roster him, obviously he's not available in the overall majority leagues. And then clearly Garendo. So we'll see on the CMC stuff.
If you want to roster Mason and Garendo over the bye, I'm very open to that because that's protecting yourself from Mason more than anything. And you can always drop Garendo afterwards.
All right. I don't think I have anything else here. Are you ready to get to the questions of the week here, Daigle?
Even some of the shallow ads are more deeper league ads just because of the injuries that happened over this weekend. So yes, let's get to the questions.
All right. Commish 1SH63 says, should I drop Dontavian Wicks for Elijah Moore? Interesting question here. Obviously, Wicks has been banged up, but more importantly to Wicks, the other wide receivers on the Packers have been healthy and playing well. And now we might get a week of Malik Willis. So I get it. What do you think about dropping Dontavian Wicks for Elijah Moore?
We've done the Malik Willis experience already for a couple starts this year. And although Matt LaFleur and Willis schemed amazing game plan, it more or less featured him running the ball and using Josh Jacobs heavily. Even Jaden Reed was barely a flex option with Willis earlier this year. So no, I even moved Wicks down in the one injury away list since we prioritize receivers there too, just because we don't know how long or if Love is going to be out. And if so, that tanks the value of everyone there.
Yeah, I think that it sounds like Love's injury is not serious. They're calling him day to day. He might miss a game or so, but I don't think it's going to be beyond that. So yeah, let's say Love is healthy. I'm curious what you think. They go Wicks or Elijah Moore. Let's say Love is healthy and fine. Let's say Jameis starts the rest of the year and Jordan Love starts the rest of the year. Then who would you rather have, Wicks or Elijah Moore? I think that's a tough one.
I think Moore is more viable week to week. Wicks has the significantly higher ceiling, but we've seen now that Wicks and Watson are the two splitting routes since Romeo Dobbs' return from, the suspension he forced.
Yep. Westy Degen says, is Xavier Legette still a stash, or would you rather have Cedric Tillman? So we have it here right in front of you in Daigle's rank/fab guidance. Tillman ahead of Legette. I would agree with that. We don't even know that it's 100% certain Deontay Johnson is going to be gone. We also don't know that Adam Thielen might not come back at some point. So I think pretty clearly Tillman over Legette for me, even though I like having both. Any thoughts there, Daigle?
And even if Tillman doesn't lead the Browns in receiving the rest of the way, it's just a situation we would rather buy into with Jameis Winston as opposed to whatever we're going to be getting with the Panthers. I can't believe Chuba Hubbard's actually, side note, surviving all of this. He just continues getting there because everyone else is tanking around him.
Yeah. And one thing I did notice on Chuba Hubbard, they didn't give him the pure garbage time this week. Miles Sanders caught like 7 balls or something like that, which, a big part of Chuba Hubbard's value and all these Panthers guys, you better be playing in garbage time because there's going to be a lot of garbage time. So if you're playing a Panthers guy, you better be sure he plays in garbage time. Speaking of Panthers, Michael Bryan says, is Bo Nix a fringe every week starter after his performances the last 4 weeks? So we've been talking about Bo Nix a lot. I just want to be clear. Last 4 weeks were Raiders, Chargers, Saints, Panthers. Now, Bo Nix floor on a week-to-week basis is going to be good because he can run, and he does run, and he runs for touchdowns, and he runs all the time. I'm worried in more difficult matchups, the throwing numbers are going to be absolutely brutal. This week, he is at Baltimore. We just talked about how bad this Baltimore pass defense is. Maybe it's okay, but playing in Baltimore as a rookie with this team, I don't know. At Kansas City after that, then Falcons, Raiders, Browns. So what do you think about Bo Nix's viability as a fantasy starter right now, Daigle?
I noted this in the Superflex section in the column that I am terrified for Bo Nix this week. Those last 3 games where he was a top 12 quarterback were all at home. And as you mentioned, Raiders, Panthers, and Chargers. Whereas on the road in Baltimore, where you can't run on them, even Jaden Daniels and Josh Allen didn't get to 25 rushing yards. And that's how Bo Nix is recording his fantasy points. If he's trying to get there purely as a passer, which is how you beat Baltimore, Nix is 29th in yards per attempt from a clean pocket this year. It's not going to go well, in my opinion. So I am shying away from Bo Nix personally this week.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of this stuff is matchup based. If you're thinking about starting Bo Nix in your league, like you should just be streaming quarterback. I mean, that's kind of my take with all these single quarterback leagues. If you don't have one of the best ones, stream into the best matchups and the best spots.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because we're seeing this now with Patrick Mahomes, Anthony Richardson, who may get benched. He was on the drop list last week. We're sticking him there still, but you can keep replicating the ceiling when you're only asked to start one. The one I didn't have the guts to do it, but even CJ Stroud, dude, is right there. He only has 2 top 12 performances all year. Yeah. It's been terrible for Stroud. And you could make an argument that you should start Justin Herbert, Jameis Winston over him this week.
Yeah. I think I would not be dumping Stroud just because Nico's going to be back. And he has games coming up against the Lions. Once Nico gets back, they have games against the Lions, Cowboys, Titans, Jaguars, Dolphins, and then in the fantasy championship, home against the Ravens. I mean, in fantasy championship week, that Texans in a dome against the Ravens, like if the Ravens don't fix their secondary by then, that could be the game of week 17.
Good point.
Nick Bodford says, yeah, if you had to choose one wide receiver to stash, who is it? Wicks, Whittington, or Coker? Tough one here. Daigle, one stash, Wicks, Whittington, or Coker.
And the Rams wide receiver situation, although all credit to Sean McVay, just kind of figured it out for a full month without his guys. It's just been so tumultuous that it's hard to even know where and how Whittington will play if one of them, Puka or Cooper Kupp, get injured again. So I probably need to get Whittington a little bit higher on the one injury away list. But personally, I think I would still take Wicks over Coker.
Yeah. I mean, and no one wants to hear it. I still think if Christian Watson goes down, I want to start Dontavian Wicks, and I know no one wants to hear that, but yeah. All right. Joe says, I blew my fab on Jalen McMillan last week. Do I cut bait and move on to Tillman, prioritize someone like Keon Coleman, or just ride it out? Yeah, we haven't talked about Keon Coleman here. I'm sure in some leagues, in some shower leagues, Keon Coleman might be on waivers out there. Daigle, how would you think about these 3 guys, McMillan, Tillman, or Keon Coleman?
And we haven't talked about McMillan yet because it's not like McMillan is in a bad position. He's just one-on-one with Cedric Tillman on waiver wires right now. So again, I do think Tillman is more viable because we assume we're getting Evans back. Not sure, but I like both of them still. You got nothing wrong with McMillan. Sterling Shepard got injured in the first quarter. McMillan didn't get a target, but he was splitting slot snaps with Shepard. And then over the last 3 quarters, McMillan was tied with Cade Otton with a 16.5% target share. And then the film bros, I'm sure, quick to point out that Baker Mayfield also just missed McMillan for a 50-yard touchdown wide open up the seam too. So I think we got a pretty good run up for McMillan, honestly. Again, it's just that Tillman is most likely the better option rest of season. So I still like McMillan and Tillman. It's hard to say. Curious to get your thoughts on it over Keon Coleman because I just don't know what the target share will be. And Coleman's been great. 21.9% target share in back-to-back games now, whereas Amari Cooper's target share has sunk so much so to a 6% share in this blowout this past game against the Seahawks. But what does it look like when Cooper's a full-time player? I don't think Coleman gets there, my personal opinion.
So my concern on McMillan is, can he win at the NFL level? We know Tillman can. We know Keon Coleman can, right? They've already shown it. So I'd probably have Keon Coleman and Tillman ahead of McMillan for me. But I agree with you on the Keon Coleman stuff. I mean, is it that valuable being the 2A or 3A option in this really run-heavy Bills offense? I don't know, but Keon Coleman is earning trust by going up and making these plays. So I'd probably have it Tillman, Coleman, McMillan for me personally. Yeah, interesting one. I got to think more about Keon Coleman. All right, last question.
Cooper Coleman situation is definitely an interesting one to parse through.
Yeah. Last question here comes from Brain Rage. He says, my week 9 opponent has Kupp and Puka Nakua. Would you advise picking up Matthew Stafford and starting him over Kyler in a tough matchup to mitigate that risk? So effectively what Brain Rage is asking here is, should I try to hedge? In other words, if Cooper Kupp and Puka Nakua have big games, I'm dead. So if I can get some of those points by starting Matthew Stafford, maybe I'll be okay. This is not typically the way that I like to play season long, unless the rest of my team is so much better than his team. And I'm like, only way I can lose this is if Kupp and Puka go nuts, then I'll start Stafford. But otherwise, I would just play it straight. Any thoughts on this one, Daigle?
The mitigate the risk conversations are always tough. I think I still take Kyler's rushing floor. We even saw Jaden Daniels off a rib injury get there, 8 carries for 52 yards against the Bears this past week. I don't think I overthink it, especially after a game where we're probably only asking this because Stafford threw for 4 touchdowns. Any other game, we're probably never considering playing Stafford over Kyler.
Yeah. And I mean, it is the matchup thing. We'll see when projections come out, but we might have Kyler and Stafford relatively close this week, considering Kyler is playing the Bears and Stafford is playing the Seahawks.
Yep.
So yeah, it might be close-ish there. And again, that would go back to, what does the rest of my team look like versus the rest of my opponent's team look like? If I need to be differentiated like DFS, then I would go Kyler. If I think that my team is so much better than his, I would go Stafford. All right. That is going to do it for your week 9 look at the Fantasy Football Waiver Wire. You can ask Daigle. DraftKit Pro subscribers can ask Daigle your personal waiver wire questions today, 5 p.m. Eastern, in Discord. Anything else, Daigle, you'd like to tell the people before we get out of here?
It's just going to be a lot of Keon Coleman, Jay McMillan, Cedric Tillman questions. I already know it.
Yes. Well, sounds amazing.
Does it?
For Daigle. For producer Adam. I am Adam. See you all later tonight for Team by Team with Silva.